You know how everyone always says the art world is just all glitz and glamour?
Right.
Well, we are going to find out how true that is when we deep dive into what it's like to be in music or film and how they deal with their mental well-being.
Hmm.
We've got a bunch of interviews with indie artists and even some experts in the industry.
Okay.
So I'm ready to get into it.
Yeah, these sources are really cool because they really do take us behind the scenes.
Yeah.
We see like the final product, the movie, the music, whatever,
Right.
but we don't really get to see how they got there.
Yeah.
The doubt, the resilience, all of it.
Yeah.
And that's really the interesting part of all this.
Right. And speaking of stories, we've got IVA and Camille. They were at a ROFFEKE Film Festival.
Okay.
She's a singer and she's a director, and they've been working together for years.
Wow.
And I think their interview, it will really strike a chord with a lot of people because they talk about how important it is to have someone there for you, especially when you're in the arts.
Yeah, I think their story just highlights how important it is to have someone who really understands the pressure of this industry.
Yeah.
Like someone who really gets it,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And they even talk about some of the challenges that they face. Like right before shooting something, they lost their makeup artist.
Oh, wow.
And then they had all these budget cuts too.
Oh, no.
And they had to figure out how to deal with that together.
Right. So having someone there who understands those struggles
Exactly.
can really help you work through it.
Yeah, and I think because they had worked together for so long already, there was this level of trust.
Yeah.
You know, they could really rely on each other.
It's like having a sounding board who gets it.
Exactly.
It's not just anybody.
Yeah.
And it's funny because they have this daily vocal warm-up routine that they do together.
Okay.
And IVA described it as like meditation, almost.
Interesting.
So this shared ritual.
Yeah, and you know, that's something that's really important for a lot of people, especially creatives who work alone a lot.
Right, because you're accountable to somebody.
Exactly. You're showing up not just for yourself, but for someone else as well.
Right. Yeah, it's not just you in your basement
Yeah.
by yourself.
It's interesting because this is very different from what Simone Massey, another filmmaker we'll talk about, does. He seems to have a much more internal approach.
Interesting.
He's all about slowing down, appreciating the good, kind of like mindfulness.
Oh, wow. So two very different approaches.
Yeah, so I think what we're seeing is there's not just one right way to deal with the pressures of being an artist.
Of course, yeah.
What works for one person might not work for another.
Totally.
But the key here is to know yourself
Mm.
and know what works for you.
Yeah.
Some people need that external support, and others are fine on their own figuring things out internally.
Right.
Both work.
And this whole idea of navigating the creative life reminds me of something that Dr. Lisa Spencer said.
Okay.
She made the film Bad Sign
Yeah.
about artist friendships.
Right.
And she said, and this really resonated with me, the regulation of art is dangerous.
Yeah, that's powerful.
Especially now with everything going on with censorship, freedom of speech.
Yeah.
I mean, her statement, it makes you think, right? It makes you think about how art has always been pushing boundaries
Yeah,
and challenging the norm.
it's true.
And a lot of artists have gotten in trouble for that.
Historically, yeah, artists have been met with backlash, even persecution for just expressing themselves.
Right, just for expressing themselves.
Yes.
And it makes you realize that art can be healing.
Yeah.
It's not just about resisting something.
Right. And it's not just for the artist either, it's for the audience too.
Exactly. Because when you're struggling with something, you see it or hear it,
Mm-hmm.
you don't feel so alone.
Yeah. It's like art can give a voice to feelings that are hard to put into words.
Yeah.
Whether it's something really personal or, you know, something big going on in the world.
And it's something we can all relate to.
Exactly. It's like the artist is building a bridge with their art.
Right.
So we don't feel so isolated.
Exactly.
And that can be so powerful for people.
Right, because sometimes you just don't have the words.
Exactly.
But you see it, you hear it,
yeah,
and it just clicks.
it's true.
But let's talk about the more practical side of things.
Okay.
Because being an artist, it's not always easy,
Right.
especially when you're trying to make a living.
Yeah. The money part can be tough.
And we talked to Dr. Nolan Stoltz about this,
Okay.
and he gave some really interesting advice.
Like what?
He talked about how there are kind of two paths you can take as an artist.
Okay.
You could either go all in on your passion,
Okay.
like you don't care about the money,
Right.
you just want to create,
Yeah.
or you can try to diversify.
And make money from other things.
Right.
To support your art.
Exactly.
So it's like a trade-off.
It is. It's like that classic starving artist image.
Right.
Do you starve for your art, or
Yeah.
do you try to find some balance?
It's a tough one.
And he really stresses that You have to know yourself.
Mm,
What are your priorities?
right. Are you okay with struggling financially?
To pursue your passion?
Exactly.
Or do you need more stability
Right.
to be able to create?
And there's no right or wrong answer.
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing.
It's about what works for you.
It all comes back to that.
Yeah.
Now, this actually reminds me of something we heard from Federico Santini.
Okay.
He's a music educator,
How cool.
and he had a really interesting take on things.
What's that?
He believes that music education, especially in middle and high school,
Yeah.
it's crucial and not just about learning music.
Right. It's more than just learning an instrument.
Exactly. He talks about how it impacts their development, like cognitively and emotionally.
Oh, wow. So it's like deeper than just learning notes on a page.
Way deeper.
Yeah.
He was saying how middle and high school, that's a tough time for kids.
Oh, yeah.
They're figuring out who they are,
Yeah.
and there's so much change going on.
Right. So music can maybe help them deal with all that.
Exactly. He says it gives them a way to understand and express their emotions.
Interesting.
Yeah, and it's like music gives them this whole other way to communicate.
Right. Like their own language.
Yeah, exactly. And, it's interesting how a lot of these interviews, they all seem to come back to this idea of community.
It is a common thread, isn't it? And it makes sense, right? Because we're not meant to be alone in this.
No.
And that goes for artists, too.
Absolutely. And it makes you think, like, what can we do?
Yeah. What's our role in all of this?
Because it's easy to just listen to this and think, oh, those poor artists.
Right. Like their struggles are totally separate from ours.
Yeah, but what if we're not just listening?
Right. What if we're actually participating in all this?
Yeah. What if we actually went to their shows, their screenings?
Supported them.
Hmm.
Bought their albums, their art, whatever they're creating.
Exactly. Even just talking to them, the artists in our own lives.
Yeah. Checking in on them, acknowledging what they do.
Because those little things can make a big difference.
Absolutely. And I think it all comes back to remembering that art doesn't just exist in a vacuum.
Right. It's not just something we observe from a distance.
Exactly. There are real people behind it.
With real feelings and real struggles.
And they're sharing a part of themselves with us.
And when we support that, we're supporting this whole ecosystem.
And that connection, that's what it's all about, isn't it? That's where the magic happens.
It is, and I think that's a good place to leave it for today.
Yeah, I think so too.
So as you go about your day, think about the art that moves you, the art that makes you think, that makes you feel something, and how you can be a part of that world.
Because we all have a role to play in keeping that creativity alive.
Absolutely. And that's it for our deep dive today. Thanks for joining us.